person and online, we're glad you've joined us as well. If this is your first time here at Journey, we're so glad you came to visit us. It's going to be a full morning of worship, and we might even let Jeremy talk a little bit. So we're going to get started this morning with a new song, so let's stand and sing together.
Oh, I need you. Walking down these desert roads, water for my thirsty soul. I need you. Oh, I need you. Your forgiveness is like sweet, sweet honey on my lips. It's like the sound of symphonies in my ears. It's like holy water on my skin. Dead men walking, slaves to sin. I want to know about being born again. I need you. Oh God, I need you. So take me to the riverside, take me under baptized. I need you. Oh God, I need you. Your forgiveness is like sweet, sweet honey on my lips. It's like the sound of symphonies in my ears. It's like holy water on my skin. I don't wanna abuse your grace. God, I need it every day. It's the only thing that ever really makes me wanna change. I don't wanna abuse your grace. God, I need it every day. It's the only thing that ever really makes me wanna change.
Sing that again.
I don't wanna abuse your grace. God, I need it every day. It's the only thing that ever really makes me wanna change. Your forgiveness is like sweet, sweet honey on my lips. It's like the sound of symphonies in my ears. It's like holy water. Your forgiveness is like sweet, sweet honey on my lips. It's like the sound of symphonies in my ears. It's like holy water on my skin. Yeah, it's like holy water on my skin. Yeah, it's like holy water on my skin.
Y'all sound great this morning. Take a moment, say hello to someone around you, then have a seat. We have some announcements.
Hey Journey, thanks for being here with us today. Whether you're worshiping here on campus or online, it is good to be together. If you're a first-time guest worshiping with us today and you're here on campus, we'd love it if you would stop by the welcome booth after service for a free gift. No obligation, just as a way to say thank you for coming today. Parents, if you have kids in our children's ministry, we have a busy week coming up. On Sunday, May 22nd, we have our Summer Kickoff Sunday. Your kids can come dressed like they're in Hawaii and they're going to have a great time. And on May 27th, we have Galaxy Wars for kindergarten through 3rd grade. You can sign up for that on the app. Our podcast, Divinely Uninspired, has a brand new episode available now. You can download it wherever you download podcasts. The best way to stay informed as to what's going on around Journey is to download the Journey app. It's also the best way to give if you'd like to do that as well. And lastly, next Sunday, May 22nd, we are going to have a taco truck here in the parking lot after service. So come hungry and be ready to eat. Thanks so much for being here with us today. Enjoy the service.
There we go. It helps you turn it on. All right. Well, we are excited you guys are here with us. A couple more things I want to add. Middle school camp, especially for middle schoolers. Make sure you sign your middle schoolers up. I'm going to be there that week. I'll be teaching that week. We would love to have your middle schoolers there that week at White Mills. So any information on that at the app, or you can stop by the Welcome Center and answer any questions as well. And high school beach camp, I'll be down there with the high schoolers as well. So make sure and sign your high schoolers up. It's a free trip to the beach for me is the way I look at it. And so it's going to be awesome. So we're super excited about that. I am glad at second service, after first service, and you guys weren't here obviously, a camel could walk through the middle of this room right now, and I would not be any less shocked in the things that happened in first service. It was, we had a guy, I don't want to get into it, and then somebody threw a baby bottle at me. I mean, there was just a lot of stuff that happened. So, but we got through it, so we're glad this is second service, all right? And so we are in the third week of our series, Better, and if you've been tracking along, this is based on a book I read a few years ago called Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets, and so we're just talking through choices we make, and basically the idea behind this series is if we want to make better choices, we have to ask better questions. There is a direct correlation between the decisions we make and the questions we ask of ourselves when making those decisions. And I'm absolutely convinced that if we would start asking better questions as we make decisions, we would actually make better decisions that would not only make our lives better, but maybe more importantly, the people around us better. Because so many of us, we often forget this, that our decisions don't just impact us, they impact the people around us, especially the ones that we take care of and the people that we love. And so in week 1, we looked at this verse from the book of Proverbs. It says this, a prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. So this is someone that they're making a choice, they see something and they stop, they have a moment and they take precautions because they realize that this maybe isn't going to go the way that they hoped. The simpleton, which I just love that word, the simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. So this is the person that you know, and we all know people like this, that make choices, they never think about the consequences, and then also are like shocked that there's consequences. Do you know people like that? That like they make a choice, it ends badly, everybody knows it was going to end badly, and then they're shocked that this is the way that it ended. And so those are people, when we talk about that focus on the immediate. Now here's where we have to be honest with ourselves. Most of us in this room, and we talked about emotionally charged decisions, we are tempted to make decisions based on how we feel in the moment, not how we want to feel overall. We very rarely, and this is something we're all guilty of, me included, focus on taking advantage of the immediate. I want this now, and not thinking about the ultimate. When really it should be the other way around. We should think about the ultimate, not the immediate. And so a couple questions we ask. The first one is this: am I being honest with myself? So when it comes to making choices, I have to learn to be honest with myself. Now, you may still make the choice you were going to make, even if it's the wrong choice, but at least you were honest with yourself and you know why you're doing it. So that's something that's really important. And you have to be honest with yourself, even if it makes you uncomfortable with yourself. Then last week, the question is, what story do you want to tell when all you are is a story that people tell? Eventually, all of us are not going to be here. All right? And eventually we get to a part of our life where, listen, all that people are going to talk about is the stories from our past. And so what stories do you want to tell? And more importantly, what stories do you want told about you? When all you are is a memory to your grandkids and your great-grandkids, what stories are they going to tell about you? And the good news is you get to decide right now. And when you tell your story, here's what I know. And when we tell our stories, we don't want people to have to skip over large portions of the story. We don't want to have them fudge the details because then it makes us look better and makes them look better. We want to be able to tell the story as it is. All right? So here's the third question. All right? And this is going to be a difficult one for a lot of us, and it's going to be a little confusing, but we'll work through it together. And here's what it is. when it comes to making a decision, especially decisions of magnitude. Now, some of us are dramatic and we think every decision is of magnitude. It's not, I promise, okay? But some decisions are of magnitude, and when we have those decisions, we need to stop and we need to ask the question, is there tension in this decision that deserves my attention? Is there a tension in making this choice that actually deserves my attention? So the best way to illustrate this, and hopefully you watched cartoons growing up like I did. Remember in cartoons, specifically in like Looney Tunes, Bugs Bunny, and then later in The Simpsons, there's been several different versions of this. When they have to make a choice, what ends up happening is there becomes two little figures that pop up on their shoulders. You know what I'm talking about? And one's always like the devil, and then one's an angel. And they have to listen to both sides because there's a tension in the choice. And which side are they going to listen to? That is what we're talking about. We're talking about that tension that we feel when we hear kind of two voices in our head when it comes to making a choice. Now, for some of us, this is obvious. When it comes to making choices, specifically bigger choices in life, we immediately go, you know what, I can't put my finger on it, but something just doesn't feel right. You ever had those moments? Or you have a moment where you go, I have no idea why, but I feel like what I'm about to do really is going to bother me. Or it's going to bother somebody around me. And maybe you've heard of these like red flag moments or caution moments or stuff like that. But it's these moments where you say, I can't put my finger on it, but something just doesn't feel right. I don't know what it is about this, but something just doesn't feel right. And when you have those moments, you owe it to yourself to pause and to pay attention to that tension. Don't ignore it. Don't brush by it. Don't rush by it. Don't talk yourself out of it. You should pay attention in those moments. You should actually let it bother you when you have this thing that's bothering you about this choice. Now, we've talked in the world of psychology for a couple weeks, so we're going to keep going along with that idea a little bit. So the first word we talked about was focalism. And focalism is where we exaggerate things and we blur out things to where all we can see is one thing. Okay, so pay attention when that happens. Then there's confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is you only listen to the voices around you that tell you what you want to hear, right? And so when it comes to choices, sometimes we're focused in on something. Sometimes we ignore the voices around us and we feel like this is the choice that we have to make. Or, here's the other side of this. Sometimes our schedules compress it. Or we're in a hurry. Or somebody else is in a hurry, and so we feel like we have to make a quick choice, right? You ever felt that pressure like, okay, I got to do this now because if I don't do this now, or you feel the pressure of somebody else. Or how about this? You ever been pressured to make a choice based not on what you want to do, but on what somebody else wants to do? And when you have those moments, that's sometimes when the tension arises. There's this piece of you that goes, okay, I know that there's this pressure to make this choice, but I'm not sure that I need to make this choice. Pay attention to that tension. Or the other way this comes about is this. You have a choice that you're going to make, and you're not bothered by it at all. In fact, you've decided, maybe because of focalism and cognitive bias, that this is the right choice. And then somebody else comes along and says, well, you know, I've been thinking about it, right? And we've all had this experience, right, that where somebody else comes along. All right? And here's the other side of that. Sometimes when we're making choices, okay, we feel like that everybody else is okay with it, but they're not. It's just that nobody is taking the time to raise their voice. You ever been in a group of people and you're like, I don't know if we should do this. And then eventually you do it, even though you all knew it was a bad idea, right? Because nobody was willing to speak that conscience, speak that tension into existence. Like, now, the other side of that, like we said, is when somebody else brings that to your attention. You know, and usually it's your parents, right? Parents are usually good at this, especially if you have kids. Or moms are really good at this. Moms are good at guilting, but sometimes there's wisdom behind that, right? And they're like, honey, that sounds good, but I think it's illegal, you know? And so there's this moment where moms, you know, want to bring that to our attention. Or sometimes it's a friend. Right? Sometimes we have friends that have permission to speak into our life, and they'll ask questions like, well, what's your wife going to think about that? Or what's your husband going to think about that? Or does your boss know about that? Or can you afford that? Right? Now, the problem with those questions, whether it's from a parent, you know, or a friend, is that whenever people question sometimes our motives behind why we're doing things or question the choice that we feel like we should make, what it does, and pay attention to this, is it causes relational tension. And it causes relational tension because we feel like that they're stepping into something that sometimes we don't feel like they should. Are you ready? You need to pay attention to that. Don't ignore it. See, our tendency and my tendency sometimes is to dodge the truth by discounting the truth teller. Does that make sense? Sometimes we dodge the truth, okay? And so what we do is we say things like, well, what do they really know about this? What does she know about this? I mean, he's never walked a mile in my shoes. He's never run a company. She's never had my job. She's never navigated the course that I have. Or maybe we vilify people and we say things like this. Or we talk bad, like, they can't even run their own life. They're not going to be able to tell me how to run mine. Or, well, why would they give me advice about this? Look at the way they raise their kids. And so what we do is we start all of a sudden discounting the truth, not because it's true or good advice, but because of who said it. In psychology, there's a term for this. It's called genetic fallacy, or the fallacy of origins. All this means is sometimes we are tempted to discount information simply based on the source of that information, which means it doesn't matter if it's a good thing that they brought that up or good advice. We discount it because of the source. Don't do that. Sometimes that tension that you're not thinking about that somebody brings in is the thing maybe that in that moment that keeps you from making a bad decision. And so we should let it bother you. When you feel that tension, whether it's internal or as a group, whether we feel that tension, or if someone comes along and asks a good question, you should allow yourself to wrestle with that tension. Let the thing that bothers you or bothers them about it, you don't have to agree with them, but let it kind of sink in and think about it, right? Here's the other thing. If something bothers you about somebody, right, or a situation, that job offer, that invitation, or that pressure that you're feeling from them, or that motives, those should be moments that you kind of double down and you say, why is it that they're pressuring me to do this? Why is it that they're wanting me to do this? Okay, and allow that tension to speak to you, because what you don't want to do is allow the pressure of time, the pressure of someone else's agenda, force you into a decision that you may soon regret, especially when it comes to the big decisions in life. Now, to illustrate this, we're going to take a look at a famous person from the Bible, but a story that's a little less famous about them, but actually one of the more fascinating stories in their life. And so it's going to take place in the life of a guy named David, and it takes place in 1 Samuel chapter 24, and it's this fascinating story. David, we often think about as just a few details of his life, but there's actually a big fascinating story behind his life. So to catch you up, if you've never heard of David, which most of you have heard of some parts of his life, essentially what happens is David steps on the pages of history as a young shepherd boy. Now, it takes place during a time where there's kings that rule the world. Israel didn't have a king. They begged God enough. God eventually gave him a king, and his name was Saul. So Saul is not a very good king. He's not a good king to the people, and he's not a good king that God wanted in place. So a prophet is going out, and he's going to find the new king, and eventually he lands on David. And so they essentially tell David, hey, one day you're going to be the king, not now, but eventually you're going to be the king when Saul is gone. And so this is like the promise. So imagine this. Most of us in this room, me included, if we were told by a prophet, one day you're going to be in charge of everything, how much would that go to your head, right? Here's what I know. I know people, you give people this much power, it goes to their heads, right? So imagine being told you're going to be the king. Well, David doesn't do this. David actually stays humble throughout this whole process. In fact, that's ultimately the reason he gets to become the king, is because he's the one that can handle the responsibility. The Bible even says that he's a man after God's own heart. So God appoints David as the next king. Then this famous scene takes place where David, one day, he has this legendary encounter with this Philistine giant named Goliath that most of us know about. We've at least heard that story in some version. And after killing Goliath, David becomes a legend in the community. Now, not everybody knows that he's the next promised king. In fact, he kind of keeps that secret. But throughout the territory, everybody knows that he's a legend because he's the one that was able to kill Goliath. In fact, they make stories about him. He becomes a general for King Saul, and he eventually marries Saul's daughter. So now Saul's not only his king, but also his father-in-law. The problem is David is becoming more and more and more popular, not of his own doing, but because of the situation of things that he's doing and his humility and his skill as a warrior. And so eventually he becomes more popular in the village, in the community, in the kingdom than Saul. And this makes Saul incredibly jealous. So jealous that he decides that he's going to kill David, who's his son-in-law, right? So maybe you have tension with your father-in-law, okay? But at least he probably hasn't tried to kill you, okay? I hope, right? So this is the scenario of what's happening. So David feels forced to flee. Partially, his best friend Jonathan, who's also Saul's son. So there's all this like relational tension in this. But eventually he flees and he becomes a fugitive. Now when he does, because he's such a legend, he has these mighty men that go with him. And they choose to become fugitives as well. A, because they back David, and B, a lot of them at this point know that he's going to be the future king. And so you should back the future king. And so they become outlaws. They become fugitives, right? And so hundreds, maybe or so, of men choose to follow David out into the desert as he tries to hide from Saul, who's trying to kill him. Now, Saul hears about this, and he decides he's got to go get David now. He gets some intel that David is in the desert, and so he takes about 3,000 soldiers. Now, why 3,000? Because even David, with his dozens and potentially 100 men, he knows how smart they are, how skilled they are as warriors, and so he has to amass a giant army. And in ancient times, 3,000 soldiers is a giant army, all to go catch one guy and a bunch of his buddies. Now, it's virtually impossible to gather that many soldiers, but Saul does it, and 3,000 men go to get David. And they go to En-gedi, which is like this desert area. So Saul leaves with these soldiers, and he's going to go track down David. So one afternoon, they're kind of making their way through the desert, tracking down David in this desert, which you got to imagine is this massive desert. It's going to be almost impossible. And so they're in this desert, and Saul has to go to the bathroom. And we know that it's number 2 because he has to go into a cave to get some privacy, right? And so it's just a fun detail of the Bible. So he has to go to the bathroom to relieve himself. So he gets down off of his horse and he walks into this cave, and he goes deep enough so that his men can't see him, but he goes deep enough. Now, what's interesting that happens in this story is the cave that he chooses to go to is the very cave that David and his men are hiding out in. And so imagine this story. I mean, this almost seems providential, right? Like you got Saul and these 3,000 men that are chasing you, and all of a sudden David, imagine looking out of the cave. And if you've ever been like in a cave, you can see out, but they can't see in, right? And so imagine him looking out and seeing the silhouette of Saul walking into the cave, stopping, removing his robes, and squatting down, right? What are the odds? In fact, this almost probably seems in his mind like the stars are lining up, and this is the way it's supposed to be. That this is going to be how David takes out Saul, who's trying to kill him, and remember that David has already been promised to be the next king. It almost seems like it's meant to be, right? And clearly, if you're David, this is an omen, right? I mean, God has delivered David's hands into his enemies. David has done nothing wrong to this point, and Saul is trying to kill him. And so here's the moment, right, where he's going to take advantage of that. And here's an unguarded, vulnerable, unexpecting Saul. And then he starts to feel the pressure from everybody else. Because remember, they're fugitives too, and they're outlaws, and they're out here living in the desert. And all of a sudden, David's men see this scene, just like David does. And listen to what it says in 1 Samuel chapter 24. The men said, "This is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish." I mean, doesn't this seem like this is the moment? All of us in this room would be like, this is the moment. All of David's men thought, this is the moment. Let's kill Saul. Let's go home. You're going to become the next king. I mean, this is the perfect scenario. Come on, David, just go do it. You can imagine that afternoon, the emotion, the tension, the adrenaline that David felt to act. But David was feeling something else as well. He was looking at this scene, and there was a tension about this scene. There was something about this scene that just didn't feel right. And as David starts to creep closer to Saul, because he's got to do something, the tension increases. And I love this story because David paid attention to the tension, even when it seemed like the tension was being not responsible. Like the responsible thing to do when it seems irrational, he pays attention. And somewhere between leaving his hiding place in the back of the cave and Saul's unprotected back, it dawns on him that he's about to murder the king. This isn't war. This isn't combat. This is murder. This is walking up behind someone who cannot defend themselves, who cannot protect themselves, and killing them. And David has this moment where he allows that tension to speak to him. And then later we see in writings that he also has this moment where he sits there and starts thinking, well, who made Saul king? Well, God did. And who is he to replace what God has put in place until the time is right? And this can't be the right time, right? To murder the king like this? And in spite of the pressure to act, in spite of the expectations of his friend just a few yards behind him, David changes course. And he decides he's going to do something different. And I think the reason that we have to talk about this is because, see, sometimes we think we control outcomes, right? In fact, all of us in this room are guilty of this. We think that if we push hard enough and we do what we want, then we can control the outcome of anything. But there's no guarantee that if David kills Saul in this way, especially if this is not what God wanted, then does he really get to become the king? Does he lose the respect of people that respect him so much? I mean, is this really the thing? See, most of us in this room, we think that if we push hard enough that we can control the outcomes. We think we can ignore the tension. Some of us think we can actually predict the future, right? Do you know where disappointment comes from? Disappointment comes from when you expect something to be one way and it ends up not being that way, right? How many of us set ourselves up for disappointment because we think we can control everything? One of the things I do with people when I counsel them, and hopefully you make an appointment after I make this statement if you need help, but one of the things I tell people when I counsel them, when we get into the hard stuff of life, most of our problems ultimately kind of come down to control. And when I tell people, and I said, this is going to be terrible, but let me just go ahead and tell you, because it was relieving to me when I figured this out. It's scary how little in life you control, right? And I'm a control person. Anybody that knows me knows I'm a control person, but it's scary how much we try to control things, and then we get disappointed when it doesn't work the way that we wanted it to, right? And maybe sometimes the reason that we feel such disappointment is because we ignored the tension that could have set us up from making that choice, that could have freed us from that disappointment. So here's David, and he's got this moment where he can control the outcome, or he thinks he can. He can kill Saul, slit his throat. But I mean, think about this story, right? He'll kill Saul, he'll be the next king, but then this is the story for the rest of his life. I mean, can you imagine being David one day, you're sitting around, you're getting your grandkids together, you're getting your kids together, and they'll be like, hey, Dad, tell us that story about that time that you snuck up behind Grandpa while he was taking a dump and you slit his throat. Can you tell us that story again? I mean, does that make a good story? No, that's a terrible story. How brave of you, David, to sneak up behind Grandpa and kill him. Good job. So the Bible tells us in verse 5 this. David was conscience stricken. You ever been conscience stricken? You ever have that moment where maybe this isn't what I'm supposed to be doing? And in this moment, he has the tension, and then his conscience awakes. And he does what very few people have the self-control to do. He stops himself from making a bad decision. And instead of murdering Saul, as he approaches Saul, he cuts off a corner of Saul's robe. And it seems weird when you first read it until you see what happens next. And so he cuts off a corner of his robe and he slips back to his men. And I'm sure they're ticked because they don't want to be outlaws. They don't want to be fugitives. Here's the moment, right? And here's what the biographer says that David tells his men. The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing there. To which his men probably replied, well, then let one of us do it. The Bible tells us that David sharply rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. So Saul leaves the cave unaware of anything that was about to happen. And so he comes out of the cave, and can you imagine one of the most dramatic scenes we see in the Bible, that he comes out of the cave to his 3,000 men. And he gets to where he's going to be, and he gets on his horse. And up out of the darkness walks David, the giant killer. And there's this moment. Can you imagine the drama? And it's not just David. David appears to be holding something. And he takes his hand out and he shows him. It's a piece of Saul's royal robe. And then David does the most unusual thing. He bows before the king, because that's what you do when you're in the front of a king. You bow. And then he stands to his feet. And in that moment, everyone recognized that David was the better man. That David once again chose to be the hero in his story. He spared Saul's life when everybody knew that Saul would have taken his. And then there's this powerful speech. Here's what he says. See, my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut off the corner of your robe, but did not kill you. See that there is nothing in my hand to indicate that I am guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion. I have not wronged you, but you are hunting me to take down my life. Listen, in other words, you know what David just said? Hey, Saul, maybe there's a tension you need to wrestle with. Because I am not your enemy. I have done nothing to you at this point. And I could have killed you, but I did not. And so, Saul, I had to pay attention to a tension. Maybe you need to pay attention to the tension. And then he says this. May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done to me, but my hand will not touch you. As the old saying goes, from evildoers come evil deeds, so my hand will not touch you. And David will not be pressured into this either. And then he says this brilliant line. Against whom has the king of Israel come out? He's trying to reason with them. He's like, where are we at? What's going on? Who are you pursuing? A dead dog? A flea? You're the king. I'm a nobody. May the Lord be our judge and decide between us. In other words, Saul, I'll wait and I'll allow God to determine the outcome. I don't need to take this into my own hands and do something I'm going to regret later. I will not play God in your life, and I will not play God in mine. And more importantly, I will not use your bad behavior as an excuse to do something that I'm going to regret. So all eyes are on Saul. He's been humiliated by David. But he wasn't humiliated by David's military skill or battle, or he was humiliated by David's humility and wisdom to pay attention to the tension in that moment. So what's Saul going to do now? Along the line of the story of David, you see these tense moments where if David or Saul had just taken a moment and taken a time out and thought about his options, he could have made way better choices. But in this one moment of clarity, Saul turns his army around and he heads back. Now, what's interesting about this story, I'm going to tell you how it ends, because it's fascinating. The Bible tells us just a few months later, so not a long period of time later, just a few months later, Saul and his army are in battle with the Philistines. And there's a random archer. The Bible makes great detail. This wasn't somebody with a skilled shot. This random archer stationed just behind the Philistines, he shoots an arrow that makes its way into the Israelite army. And this random arrow and this random archer, they shoot Saul. And he's mortally wounded. And because Saul doesn't want to die at the Philistine hands, he actually falls on his own sword to kill himself. And then the word reaches the city, and the citizens proclaim David as king, and he becomes the next king of Israel without having to murder Saul. Now, why do I tell you how it ends? Because it's fascinating to me. And maybe David thought this, and the text just doesn't tell it, but listen to this. If somebody had told David how it was going to work out, wouldn't it have made the decision in the cave a lot easier? Right? It would have been obvious. Like, I don't have to murder him. In a few months, he's going to be dead anyway, and I get to become the king the right way. Imagine if God had just showed up to David and said, David, just a few pages from now, the Philistines are going to take care of Saul. Wouldn't that have made it so much easier? But he didn't know it. And you don't know the future when it comes to the tough decisions you have to make either, do you? That's not how life works. But that's why it's so important to pay attention to the tension that we feel sometimes. That's why we dare not always take matters into our own hands and do what we think is wise, even when other tension or points or other people are telling us it's not wise. That's why we dare not trust our ability to predict the future or our ability to control outcomes. So is there a tension that deserves your attention? And if so, I promise you, you need to let it bother you. Let it bother you until you know why it bothers you. Don't ignore it. Don't brush by it. Listen, the tension you feel in some of these hard moments in life may be the very way that God is protecting you and your family and your story. Maybe it's the way he's using to keep you from a decision that you will soon live to regret. And it's inconvenient, and it seems irrational, but it may be the very conscience-stricken thing that God gives us to keep us from making the choices that we will regret and will hurt the people around us that we love. So, simple question. Ready? Are you being honest with yourself? When your life is only a story that you will tell, what story will you tell? And when you're facing a tough choice, is there a tension in that choice that deserves your attention? And if so, we should all pay attention, and you'll almost always be glad that you did. Let's pray. Father God, we love you. We thank you for the stories of guys like David, who lived a real life, who faced very tense moments at times, but yet there's this one moment where he has the clarity to address the situation, to not do something that he's going to regret almost immediately. And God, what we need in this room, what I need is when it comes to tough choices that we have to make, big life moments or moments in relationships or whatever it is, God, that you give us the wisdom we need to allow ourselves to pay attention to maybe the tension that you're giving us, God, through our conscience, through the Spirit, whatever it is, but that tension that we feel about this choice. Give us the wisdom to pay attention. Give us the strength to act upon it, God. Maybe give us the strength sometimes to reach out to people and ask their opinion on it and to hear the tension that they wrestle with in those decisions. And then, God, give us the peace to make the right choice and the wisdom to be accepting of the choice that we have to make, because it's what you want for us and it's what's going to lead us to a better place and a better life and a better story that we don't regret or we have to fudge the details because of so many terrible choices that we've made. And so, God, in all of that, let us know that we'll always find the grace, wisdom, and love that only you can give us, even when we mess up and even when we make the wrong choice. And so, God, we love you. We thank you, God. I pray that these words we're about to sing, that we'll believe these, we'll hold on to these truths that come from you. In your son's name we pray. Amen.
We come to a time in our service where we have communion. And there's still plenty of time to go and grab that little cup of juice and that cracker. So if you haven't had a moment, they're almost at every exit here in this sanctuary. If you're new at Journey, we take communion as a personal time. We take it as a reflection. We still remember what was done on the cross for each and every one of us. We still remember the body that was broken. And we still remember Jesus and his blood that was spilled. But as Jeremy spoke about making decisions, and there's been plenty of times in my life where I have made a decision that I've regretted. And sometimes those decisions are just irreversible, and you can't go back to the way it was. But this communion, it gives us a time, each and every one of us, to reflect on our decisions that we've made. And it gives us time to remember that Jesus has said, it's okay that you made that decision. I'm going to love you anyways. I'm going to give my life for you. and I want to spend forever with you. And so it's my prayer that as you take communion, that you give thanks for the mercy and the grace that was shown to you. And when the band starts to play, you can stand and worship with us. Cast my mind to Calvary, where Jesus bled and died for me. I see his wounds, his hands, his feet. My Savior on that cursed tree. His body bound and drenched in tears, they laid him down in Joseph's tomb, the entrance sealed by heavy stone. Messiah still and all alone. Oh, praise the name. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise his name forevermore. For endless days we will sing your praise, oh Lord our God. And on the third, at break of dawn, the Son of Heaven rose again. Oh, tremble death, where is your sting? The angels roar for Christ the King. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise his name forevermore. For endless days we will sing your praise, oh Lord our God. He shall return in robes of white. The blazing sun shall pierce the night, and I will rise among the saints. My gaze transfixed on Jesus' face. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise his name forevermore. For endless days we will sing your praise, oh Lord our God. We're going to sing that again, church. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise his name forevermore. Who am I that the highest king wouldn't welcome me? I was lost, but he brought me in. Oh, his love for me. Oh, his love for me. Sing this out. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I free at last, he has ransomed me. Oh, his grace runs deep. While I was a slave to sin, Jesus died for me. Yes, he died for me. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free. Child of God, yes I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God, yes I am. I am chosen. House. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. There's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. This house. You sing this out. There's a place for me. I'm a child.
Praise be the weapon that silences the enemy. Let praise be a weapon that conquers all anxiety. Oh, let it rise. Let praise arise. We sing your name in the dark and it changes everything. We sing with all we are and we claim your victory. Oh, let it rise. Let faith arise.
Go.
We'll see you break down every wall. We'll watch the giants fall. For fear cannot survive when we praise you. The God of breakthroughs on our side. Forever lift him high. With all creation cry, God, we praise you. Oh, we praise you. Oh, song that overcomes the raging sea. Let faith be the song that calms the storm inside of me. Oh, let it rise. Let faith arise. We'll see you break down every wall. We'll watch the giants fall. For fear cannot survive when we praise you. The God of breakthroughs on our side. Forever lift him high. With all creation cry, God, we praise you. Oh, we praise you. Oh, we praise you. Oh, we praise you.
It's been a joy worshiping with you this morning. We're going to go let you enjoy the beautiful day. We hope to see you back next Sunday. Have a good week.